This is Derrick Bros with the Conscious Resistance. Today I'm happy to bring to you my next guest, Brandon Smith of altmarket.com. Brandon often writes about solutions outside of the purview of the government, exiting their control and creating new ideas, new modes of living and thinking. Welcome to the show, Brandon. How are you doing?
Hey Derek, how's it going?
It's going great, man. I wanted to bring you on. We talked 2 years ago. Brandon and I met at Paul Fest, and we did an interview there talking about solutions then. And as much as they seemed relevant then, they seem even more relevant now in the world we're living in. And we were just discussing more people seem to be moving towards solutions and looking for solutions outside of the government, not just looking for solutions within the same system and hoping that that's going to bring real change. And there was an article that you wrote recently, Brandon, that really caught my eyes and my ears, and I wanted to talk to you further about it because I think this is an important message. And it was about non-participation and decentralization as primers for the revolution. So go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about alt market first, and then get us into the ideas that brought about that piece.
All market is is sort of an extension of all the work I was doing. I used to run a website called neithercorp.us, and I was doing a lot of macroeconomic work, a lot of examinations of the overall situation, the economic situation in the United States and around the world, and how those interrelated. And what I saw was a considerable threat to the American public, a considerable threat to our ability to sustain ourselves and to survive. And I think at that time, I wanted to implement some kind of a solution, but a lot of the solutions that I saw being put out there by other people in the movement, I just didn't think they were. I didn't think they would work. I didn't think that they were enough. And I was approached by Stuart Rhodes of Oath Keepers, and he sort of challenged me to really get out there and start my own sort of solutions-based website, and that's where All Market comes from. And the idea of All Market is that it's sort of a networking hub for people within the liberty movement to get together and start their own localized solutions instead of relying on sort of a top-down solution. I want a more bottom-up solution, something more fundamental within people's communities. And I really think that's sort of where the movement has to go in order to get anything done, because clearly a lot of the top-down solutions that are out there, they're not applicable. They don't work. The protesting and all of that's great for educational purposes, but when it gets down to real, concrete results, we're really going to have to start engaging in our own communities, our own neighborhoods, and start building our own systems, our own alternative economies, our own mutual aid networks, our own neighborhood watches, our own sort of self-defense networks, all of that stuff. We're going to have to start taking back responsibility for all the things that we sort of let the system provide for us for a long time.
Yeah, I agree with you. We have to find ways to reintegrate ourselves back into ways of living for ourselves and not giving away that power to a government or any type of higher authority, anything outside of ourselves, really. Because from my understanding, from my perspective, the battle, the struggle, definitely is one of the physical realm, but it also goes deeper and it goes into knowing yourself. The better you know yourself, the better you know your limits, your fears, and you can push yourself harder. You can do these things and challenge yourself in ways that somebody who's disconnected and distracted by the mainstream, by the government and their institutions, is less likely to be aware of themselves and to push themselves to challenge themselves and to start becoming sustainable, to start becoming more self-sufficient. In the article as well, what I wanted to get into at the beginning of this article, you wrote about decentralization and about non-participation with the system. You start out basically pointing out how some believe that the right solutions aren't there yet, so we shouldn't do anything. And I think it kind of points to people being paralyzed by a lack of creativity. Really, is what it is. I mean, a lack of thinking and ingenuity to create something different outside of the state. And again, it's because we've only been taught and shown this one way of thinking, that this is the only way we're going to move past these problems, is by working with this institution. But how did you get to that, I guess, that epiphany there, that understanding that it's really that some believe if we can't figure out how to make it perfect, the next step we should just sit still?
Well, I've been writing in the liberty movement for about 8 years now, since before the derivatives crash, and I've always been consistently confronted with arguments that the the it's not enough to examine the problem. You need to present everyone with a solution, and I agree. I agree that people need solutions. People need to be sort of given a path, or somebody needs to blaze a trail for a lot of other people in the movement. I think that's absolutely necessary. However, I also think that people need to stop waiting around for others to provide them the avenue of escape from this terrible situation. They need to start focusing on themselves. They need to start looking at their own local situation and asking, well, what can I do to better prepare myself and my community for a collapse scenario, or a totalitarian sort of governmental development. And so my challenge to the movement, to the people who kept asking me, well, what is your solution? My challenge was, well, was to ask them, what is your solution? What are you going to do for yourself and for your neighborhood and for your town and for your county? What are you going to do to make your situation better? And I'm willing to, if they're willing to sit down and really take the initiative to make something happen within their own area and help others who are like-minded in their community, if they're willing to do that, then I'm willing to help them by giving them a sort of list of initiatives that they can take to make that happen.
Yeah, it's important to do that, because not everyone has an understanding that this is possible outside of the system. And in my own work, in my own community, trying to encourage people to get active in gardening, trying to encourage people to just get active. We do Skillshare classes, trying to get people to learn how to make their own soap, or learn any kind of skill that we all have that we could share with each other, share in the community to empower each other. I think some people are often surprised by how easy it is to get active and to get things going. You just have to start doing it and start asking your neighbors if they'd be willing to barter, for certain things you have readily available weekly, or if you can start trading with somebody from the vegetables and the crops you've been growing. It's just different things. There's a lot of little steps to take to get these things implemented that are outside of the purview of the system and allow you to live a bit more freely. Let's go through the article though. So non-participation. What exactly is non-participation and the non-participation principle?
Well, the non-participation principle is essentially is a very simple thing. It's been used throughout history. It wasn't called the non-participation principle back during the American Revolution, when the colonials and the founding fathers broke from the British monarchy, but it was the same concept, which is to provide for yourself the necessities which the corrupt establishment system will not or cannot. What is the system providing for you that you could end up providing for yourself? Imagine that, I ask people to imagine that the government doesn't exist. Imagine that you wake up tomorrow and it doesn't exist. The system doesn't exist. You don't have the welfare, all the entitlement programs. You don't have hospitals. You don't have police. You don't have public schools. So, what would you do if you woke up tomorrow and all those things were gone? What would you do? What would you have to do for yourself in order to survive? And it's when people really sit down and consider that, those things could disappear. It's actually sort of a liberating idea. We've sort of been coddled and cradled by the system for so long. A lot of Americans don't realize that they could easily provide most of these things for themselves if they just took the initiative to do so. And so the non-participation principle is essentially, it's taking that to the level of activism. So start providing all those things, even if the system still exists. Start providing all of those things for yourself right now in preparation for either a collapse of the system or just to break from the system entirely and start building your own sort of self-sustaining networks within your own community. And once you do that, essentially, and if you are successful, then what you do is you sort of decouple from the mainstream system and you force them into a kind of a conundrum. Either they can ignore you and admit that you've built something better and leave you alone, or they can try to stop you. They can try to interfere with what you're doing because it's a threat to their authority. It's a threat to their relevance. Because you basically, through non-participation, you've made them irrelevant. You've shown that they don't matter. You don't need them anymore. And you've done it in a very peaceful way, and that's the important part. You've broken from the system and you're doing your own thing. So they can respond by ignoring you or attacking you, and in either case you win. Because if they ignore you, you win. They have to fade into the dustbin of history, and you've won. You've set up your own system. You don't need them anymore, and they're no longer an influence in your life or in your community. If they attack you, then they have to come down off of their sort of establishment pedestal and take the mask off. They have to reveal their tyranny in the wide open, out to everybody, and they lose the moral high ground. So you gain moral high ground, you gain initiative, you gain self-sustainability, and they lose quite a bit in that scenario. So.
Yeah, you're right about that. They lose by having to show their true colors. Now, before we go into decentralization, though, I also hold this similar beliefs of what you just espoused, that by building solutions now, being forward-thinking individuals, we can lessen the possibility of pain in the future, and also say we somehow avoid economic collapse, or we learn to change the government around, or whatever happens. Let's imagine everything goes right without conflict. In the process of that, you find that becoming more self-sustaining, more self-sufficient is just a better way to live. You become closer to, your diet, you become closer to your community, you come closer to yourself. And from what my experience and from meeting others, it just ends up being, wow, okay, whether I was doing this out of fear or just to try to save my family and my future, now I like to live this way. I'd rather not be involved with a bloodthirsty group of individuals, criminals who claim authority over my life and thousands of millions of other people, and launch wars in my name and all types of things like that. Survey you using your money. And once you decide you want to get out of those systems, life can be a lot more fulfilling, by being free and removing yourself from their system. So I think that's definitely a very important point. Now, you also hit upon decentralization. What do you think is the importance of decentralization in a revolution?
Well, the power of the global system, the power of globalization is in the process of centralization. And centralization is basically, to simplify it, is the action of taking power from as many individuals as possible, taking it away from them, and centralizing it into the hands of as few people as possible. So we've been going through that for humanity's been going through that for thousands of years. That's what elitists do. That's what globalists do. They take power from the people and establish it into a very condensed sort of uh, centralized system. And my argument is that we don't have to. There's no reason for us to allow that to happen. Um, we have the power to take back all of the things that make us dependent on the system. It's just the issue is not so much they're scary and frightening and they have so much control. Um, the issue is more about it really comes down to laziness. Um, the a lot of Americans, a lot of people, just don't want to put in the work, the energy, and the initiative that it takes to become self-sustaining and independent from the system. There's nothing stopping us from doing this, really. Anyone can, anyone can go off grid, anyone can grow their own food, anyone can provide their own electricity, water, so on and so forth. Anyone can build a barter network within their neighborhood, within their town and county. Anyone can build all the systems that we rely on for the establishment. Everything the establishment has built up that we are dependent on. We can take back anytime. Tomorrow, you could become totally independent. You just have to get up off your ass, basically, and make it happen. And so, you know, if Americans would take that initiative, if we could convince them to do that, I think that we could change the American dynamic overnight. Overnight, we could change things. And they can always, the system, as I said before, the system can always come after you and try to attack you for that. But if they do, at least you're in a better position when they do. At least you're self-sustaining. You can provide your own food. You can provide your own electricity. You're sort of you've insulated yourself quite a bit from the attacks that they can make, how they can hurt you. And you know, if Americans are, especially activists, if they're dependent on the establishment system, I have to ask, well, how are you going to fight the establishment system?
I think that's a great question, and one that's probably often overlooked by plenty of well-meaning activists who get ingrained further into the system, hoping that their energy will be well spent and that somehow the system is going to allow them to change within. And honestly, 2 years ago, I mean, I kind of already got it, but 2 years ago, everything I knew about the way politics works was confirmed when we first met during the RNC in Tampa. Whenever obviously the establishment media and the establishment themselves, through the delegates, did everything they could to keep somebody like Ron Paul out. And whether or not the listeners agree with Ron Paul's policy or not, what I always try to point out is the fact that the way that they showed, if any individual gets close to beating them at their own game, they'll simply change the rules at will whenever they need to. So to believe that that's going to actually create real change is a farce, and it's wasted energy, I believe. But I also appreciate the good people who do take their time and energy and go to try to fight within those channels to spread a message, because hopefully within, as we said earlier, within years to come, it's going to be more and more obvious that there are no answers within government, and so the more people who recognize that now, the better will be. Now, I do want to get into some specifics here now, because again, I agree that we create something, we start having sustainable communities. There's pockets of entrepreneurs, and there's pockets of self-sustaining communities and gardens and Skillshare classes and alternative currencies and all types of things like that. And as we've seen, the state will ramp up their efforts. They will demonize. They will use the media and possibly at some point come outright and attack say like in a Waco situation of some group, while they tell the rest of the nation that this is a cult or a bunch of domestic terrorists that need to be wiped out. So in your mind, and this is just strategically, what would you do, or what would somebody do in these situations when we have the government coming after us? Because this is a question that comes up often, one that I've dealt with and answered for other individuals. What do we do in the instance that the state does decide they're going to strike forth? Yes, so they've just exposed themselves. They've just lost the moral high ground, and everyone in the independent alternative media sees it, and they're able to spread that message. But for the most part, the mainstream media still parrots their narrative, and the government says what they say. But we've just dealt with a situation where, let's say a community has just been smashed down because they were getting too big and they were getting too free. What's the next step after that?
Well, I would point people to the situation in Mexico, in the region of Michoacan. I would tell people to look at how the how the average citizens of that region of Mexico have handled tyranny from the government and from the cartels, the drug cartels in that region. And essentially what they've done is they've armed up in spite of gun laws, very stringent gun laws in Mexico. They armed up, they formed neighborhood watches and community defense groups, and they struck back. And that concept is, I think, very frightening to a lot of people, a lot of activists, because the assumption in a lot of activist movements is that you will eventually be able to affect change through education and awareness. And I think that's true to a point, but that ideology only works when you're facing an establishment system that requires a certain amount of benevolence. They have to appear that they are just and fair to the world or to the nation at large. They have to put on a show. But what happens when they no longer feel the need to put on that show? What happens? What happens when you're facing the armies of Mussolini or Hitler or Stalin? What happens? What do you do? Activism alone, education alone is not enough. So I would point people to Michoacan in Mexico and show them how successful they've been. They've had cartels going after them. They've had the Mexican government going after. Now the Mexican government's kind of backing away, but initially they had the whole world going after them. They armed up and they defended themselves, and they basically wiped out the cartels in their region. So Americans, I believe, are better equipped than the people of Michoacan to do the same exact thing. They, we have a history of defiance and revolution. That's what Americans pride themselves on. We're also a very, I believe, far better trained society in terms of self-defense than a lot of societies around the world. So we can deal with our own cartels here in the United States the same way that the Michoacan vigilantes, as they're called, are dealing with the cartels in their region.
I like that. Yeah, good point there. We are dealing with our own set of cartels. Our own cartels over here. I got a couple more questions before I let you go, Brandon. One of them is, and they're both dealing with specific aspects of this revolution, this evolution that we're working towards and that's currently happening, which is, as you said, spreading from awareness, spreading through education, and then there are some practical steps to do in your life to help you become more secure in that and to push you beyond just being partially dependent on the system towards an area of your life that could include full independence from a system that has done nothing but leech off of you your entire life. What do you believe is the role of technology in this revolution? What part do you think it has to play?
Well, I think that we should utilize the technology that's available while we can. I don't think that we should become dependent on it as a method for decoupling from the system. I think that uh, situations or sort of solutions like Bitcoin, things like that. I think they present sort of an alluring and easy format for people to uh, sort of pretend to break from the system when they're actually not. And I would challenge people to start thinking locally and start looking into physical solutions within their own communities rather than trying to lock into sort of some kind of technological, very very sexy kind of solution like Bitcoin. The main reason is because the systems, the technological systems, and the communication networks that we have today don't necessarily have to exist tomorrow, and they may not exist tomorrow. The web as we know it uh, may not exist tomorrow, as we've seen through the revelations from Edward Snowden and others. The NSA and the government at large basically are tapped into every aspect of the web. They're tapped into the very core of the web. So we should exploit the web as an educational tool while we can, but the web itself is not necessarily going to save us from an economic collapse or a totalitarian system, because they control the web, they control that system. So you need to start breaking from that system, and start setting up your own networks locally. You need to start working with people face to face. You need to start setting up communication systems that they can control, like ham radio. Ham radio is a very effective tool for people who want to decouple from the system and start communicating with each other. So you need to. I would tell activists, look, use these systems while you can, use the technology while you can, but do not assume that these systems will exist tomorrow as we know them.
I think that's a great piece of advice. I do see technology's role in moving us towards freedom and advancing freedom, but I also have been on the side of certain debates where I've been called anti-technology for various reasons. But I don't consider myself to be anti-technology, but I do see the ups and downs, just like any form of technology or any tool. It can be used for good or for bad, and currently the people in control are using it for surveillance. As you said, we know from Edward Snowden, they're using it for murder, for surveillance, these type of things. But in the hands of a more freed market and the people, we might see it applied in much different ways. But I also agree that we can't guarantee these systems will be here forever, and it's would be a hell of a mistake to put all your time and energy into something that poof is no longer available, and there goes your skills and a hard drive or something like that. So it's important to invest in the physical world, definitely. And last question, I think I get what you're alluding to a little bit earlier about the inevitability of the state coming after any peaceful movement, and that ultimately, we have to possibly become the vigilantes, as they call them in Mexico, which is really just communities getting sick and tired of being, dealing with corruption in their police force and in their government, and deciding to take their communities into their own hands. They are not seeking to initiate violence; they're seeking to defend themselves and stop the repression there. So knowing that, and also knowing other historical movements, is it inevitable that the United States of America will deal with a violent reaction from this government, whether it's the Obama administration or a future president to come, in the face of awareness that is happening, in the face of growing community involvement, community gardens, community networks, alternative currencies, whether digital or real world physical currencies. These things are growing. These ideas are spreading, and the government and the media are very aware of this. Do you think there is an eventuality here that some may be ignoring?
Yes, I do. I think that there's a considerable portion of the liberty movement that uh, they don't want to consider the possibility that they may have to engage in a physical that's a very scary concept to them. And I think it's important for everyone in the liberty movement to um, sort of assume the worst. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, I guess would be what I would tell them. Um, don't assume that you're going to be able to work within the system to change it. I think that we've gotten to the point where it's very obvious to me that the system is so broken. Um, the political system, the economic system, our social systems are so broken and so corrupt that we may have to start over completely from scratch. And that's going to, whenever that happens in a society throughout history, we see that violence is usually the result. And it's important for the movement to accept that as a possibility, as a probably inevitable possibility, and learn how to deal with violence in an enlightened way, I guess would be a word. It's important to be an intellectual warrior, but you need to be an actual warrior too. I would tell people, look at the concept of look into the concept of Bushido and the sort of the warrior mindset of the martial arts, that sort of thing. You don't have to become a monster to become a warrior, and I think that that's something that the movement needs to adopt, and they need to adopt it very quickly. They need to be at peace with the idea of defending themselves. And the globalist system is, I think it's become clear to a lot of us that the globalist system is being operated by psychopathic people, very psychopathic people. And psychopaths generally do not relinquish power voluntarily. They don't give it up, even in the face of massive opposition or majority opposition. Generally, a psychopath would rather try to take you with them, as they fall, than give up their power. So we need to deal with that eventuality. We need to deal with that idea and accept it, and from that point on, figure out how to counter it. And so what I would challenge the liberty movement at large. I would challenge them to not just be intellectual warriors, but to be true warriors. To be the warrior poets of Bushido. You need to adopt that mentality if we're going to survive what I think is coming.
I would agree with that. I think that it is important to have a true understanding and a realistic understanding of all possibilities. And understanding what it means to be a warrior means many different things. There's many facets to that, including, for the time being a warrior of peace and hoping that we can create systems that will allow those who are searching for answers to find ways to exit. Because the more we have a mass exit from the system, the greater our chances to achieve this change without too much bloodshed or violence, and that's what we can all hope for and work towards. I really appreciate you taking your time out and talking with us, Brandon. Go ahead and let everybody know where they can find all your work at.
Sure. They can visit alt-market.com, altmarket.com. That's where you can find all my essays, all my economic analysis. And they can also use that website as a networking hub to meet others within their communities, within their state or county, and start building these mutual aid groups, barter groups, self-defense groups, whatever you think you need within your community. You can start meeting people at altmarket.com and decoupling from the mainstream system.
Thank you very much, Brandon. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Derrick.